Hey guys, it's Hailey, and today we're gonna do our October reading wrap up. Please don't mind that my hair's wet. I had a long day yesterday and I don't feel great, and I just didn't want to do my hair. Also, there's a kitten right here, so if you hear some ruckus, it's probably her, and I'm sorry. She likes to cause a ruckus. So, anyway, so we're gonna get into the books I read. I read 12 or 13, depending on how you count it. I have one book that is 2 books in one, so 12 or 13, depending on how you count that. But I set out to read some spooky books this month. I read some. I didn't get as many in as I would like because I read some that were pretty heavy, and I wanted to, some of them I just needed a break after. So the first book I read was Kikis Delivery Service. I am sure this one was first. Yeah, the classic that inspired the Studio Ghibli film. I love the Studio Ghibli, and I had gotten this and I just wanted to read it, and Witchy is kind of October-y, Halloween-y, spooky, even though it's definitely like a heartwarming story. I really liked it. This book, I felt it was hard to rate. I rated it a 4 or 5 out of 5 because it's not like a profound novel, you know what I mean? But it is just very easy to read. And it's just cute and I like it. Also, this was a really good reading month for me, to be honest. I don't know, I have never read 13 books in a month, and I had a lot of books that I rated very highly. Not all of them are, but I also have a new favorite book of of all time. Not my favorite book of all time, but in that category of my favorite books. Anyway, Beautiful World, Where Are You? I don't think this is better than Normal People, which I adored Normal People. However, this felt way more mature than Normal People. I did enjoy a lot of aspects of this book. Basically, it's flipping between characters Eileen and Alice. And the part that I really enjoyed was the letters between Eileen and Alice. They're very thought-provoking, and it dealt with a lot of real world topics that it felt like Sally Rooney just wanted to talk about, and she interpreted that in this book. But it talked about things like religion, politics, climate change, socioeconomics, sexuality, anthropology, so much stuff. And they're basically little essays. The other thing that I thought was interesting in this book was the way that Sally Rooney seemed very what's the word? She seemed very self-aware. For example, in this book, they talked about how a lot of art is pointless, and in the grand scheme of things, with there being things like climate change and war and all these things, and art just being pointless. And it seems like she's very aware of her class and her intellect, and is able to critique that, basically. This book talks a lot about relationships and sex, and what I thought was interesting in this book, this may be a very light spoiler, it's nothing crazy, but this book talks about the pandemic. This book felt very much like it wanted to talk about sex and relationships and the importance of relationships and friendships throughout we can really feel how important that is throughout the pandemic that we're currently living through, because during that past year or two we've been just isolated. So I think it really kind of talks to the importance of that. It's very interesting the way she kind of talks about all the horrible things happening in this world and how little we can do about it. And the title coming to fruition of Beautiful World, Where Are You? And then we find that throughout our relationships and our friendships. And I feel like the whole premise of the book is showing that beautiful world is out there, but it's within our interpersonal relationships. Just because it's like ordinary and everyday doesn't make it less important. I really liked this book. I originally rated this a 4 out of 5. You could rate it 4.5 out of 5 or so. I really did like it, but I didn't like it as much as normal people. The next book I read was Stephen King's Misery. This was my first Stephen King that I ever read. I haven't watched that many Stephen King movies. I haven't read that many Stephen King books. This is my first one. I watched Pet Sematary not even that long ago, maybe like a couple months ago. But this book was really good. At first I was having a little bit of trouble like getting into it, but once the plot like picked up, it was so good. I couldn't put it down. I did like 90% of the reading in one sitting, and then immediately after I finished reading it, I watched the movie. Basically, if you don't know what this book's about, basically it's about this author. He's this famous author, and he gets into this accident, and he just so happened to be picked up by his most #1 fan, and she has been taking care of him. But little does he know, she really is a little bit sinister, but she basically wants him to continue writing his Misery, which is the book series that he writes, for her. And she's basically keeping him as like a prisoner in her home. And she's a little loony. I don't know what the word you would want to say is. She's got some issues. And it was really good. And I rated it a 4 out of 5. The next book, I believe this is a classic. This is We've Always Lived in the Castle. It's got the deckled edges. I did not like this book. I rated this a 1 out of 5. Basically, it's about these sisters who live together, but their family has kind of been like ostracized because of the fact that there were some deaths in their family that the youngest sister was on trial for. I believe they were poisoned. If that just flipped, I'm so sorry. It just flipped in my viewfinder. I don't know what that was. Anyway, her family was poisoned, and not very many people lived out of that. It's the older sister and the younger sister, and one of the sisters got put on trial, but they didn't end up like prosecuting her, but because of the fact that she was the only one who hadn't eaten the food. But their family that stays away from the town because the town is very hateful towards them, and it kind of gave me like Frankenstein vibes. And their cousin comes through and like comes and hangs out with them, but he doesn't seem trustworthy. He like didn't, I don't know, like he gave off bad vibes, and like the story wasn't that bad. It just like, for me, this book drug on, and like there was nothing that was like keeping me attached to the story. So if you like classics, you probably would like this. A lot of people do. I just didn't enjoy it. After that, I read They Never Learn. This book was pretty good. Basically, it's kind of like a good for her novel, or like a snapped novel. I liked it. I wouldn't say a lot. I would say some of the plot twists I kind of guessed. But basically, this book is about this teacher at a university who just murders men who like, it's kind of like Dexter-esque, where she like murders bad people who do these bad things. Hers is primarily men who do bad things, and it goes from her point of view to a younger woman's point of view who was at university, who went through something bad, or there was some issues with a boy, and it goes between them, and it is pretty good. The murders get a little bit, there are some issues, causes some drama. I enjoyed it. There was a part in my heart I got so sad about at the end. I feel like I can't say what that was. But I felt like through reading this book, it felt very like reading through like what these men have done and the way they act. I feel like it very much accurately describes some of the things that like us women go through. And it really did feel pretty accurate in the portrayal of that. So I did like this book. The only reason I rated it a little bit lower is because like it was a little bit predictable, and I'm not even a person who sits there and tries to predict what's going to happen next. It was very much like, I'm very much like someone who I'm like, I'm just along for the ride. But this one, I definitely guessed some of the things were going to happen. You could tell the plot line was going to go there, but it was still enjoyable to read. 4 out of 5. This next book. John Green, The Anthropocene Reviewed. Now this is basically, well, John Green has been one of my favorite authors since I was like 15. And when I say one of my favorite authors, I mean my favorite author. And this book felt way more mature for like an adult reader, but basically this is a nonfiction. If you've listened to his podcast, The Anthropocene Reviewed, it's basically that in a book where it's short essays about whatever topic it is. But I love reading John Green books, and I have since I was 15, and I feel like his writing worked so well when I was younger, and now it works well as when I'm an adult. And the thing I love about this book is if you watch his Vlogbrothers channel, it really sounds like the way he talks. Like as I'm reading this, I just hear him. And I thought it was so good. It was very thought-provoking. And he has such a way of making things that are so mundane sounding so, he just makes them sound so beautiful. And this book is so informative. It teaches you a lot, but also at the same time makes you think about like the world around you. It made me feel very existential about like the world and feeling dread about the negative impact that's happening around the world. And it talks about how little we as individuals can do about it, but how much we can also do about it. And at the same time, it's so like heart-wrenching and funny and sad and enriching, and there's so much to love about this book. I had a couple of favorites that I thought were so cool. Like there's my favorites are the Mario Party one, where basically it starts with him just talking about like Mario Party is the game, or Mario Kart, sorry. And it just goes into, you know, his relationship with his children, which I thought was so sweet. But then it starts going and talking about like equality versus equity in the world around us, and how he's benefited from certain things, certain advantages such as money and fame and white privilege and being a male, and how sometimes he didn't even realize some of these benefits that happened to him, but also continues to talk about how important it is for him to recognize those benefits as to not continue further that cycle. It's just like it's everything he writes, just I'm such a fangirl of. And this one was so good, and I love the representation of like COVID and the way that's affected all of us. And it's just, it's great. It's so good. I rated this a 4.5 out of 5. The only reason I rated it a little bit lower is like some of the things, like since there are certain essays, they're all different essays, some of the things you're not going to be as interested in as the others. So like for me, like the sports ones weren't really as interesting, but there are other ones that are, like this Super Mario Kart, and like there was one about Monopoly that talked about, you know, capitalism and but is good. I enjoyed it. This is the one where I said it can be counted as 1 or 2. This is the first edition of Death Note. It's the first and second book, so you can count this as 1 or 2, but I did read the first edition. Basically what happened was I've already watched the whole anime. It's so good. And then I was like, you know what, let's watch that live action version. The live action with Nat Wolff. It was so bad. I hated it. And I was like, you know what, I need to make up for it and start reading my my like black edition, so I read it. It's really good. I feel weird about rating this. It was good. I was surprised at how accurate they made the anime to these. Like, it's literally the exact same thing, like word for word, like frame for frame. It's so good, and that's probably why the anime was so good. This next book, oh my gosh. Okay, so this was an Allie V recommendation. The Summer I Died. This is the book where I was like, okay, after I read this, I needed to read something lighthearted because, oh my god, this was intense. I rated this a 4 out of 5, but basically these two guys get held hostage by this freaking crazy man. And this is like torture porn. It's so gruesome, and like I was raised on like horror movies and like violence and gore, and it never bothered me, but because of the fact that those were primarily movies, they couldn't go like as in depth as like this book did. Once it starts, it doesn't let up. Like, it was a few chapters in where I was like, okay, what's gonna happen, you know what I mean? But then once it started, it did not let up. It was so gruesome, it was so grotesque. And like, let me tell you something, in the beginning of this book there were, or just throughout this book, there are several like slurs, and I was like, why is no one talking about this? And then I finished reading it. I was like, oh, because it gets so much worse, because this book is so, it's insanely grotesque. And after I finished reading this, I was like, I need a break. But let me tell you something, the end of this book was so good. It was so fast paced. Like the last 50, 60 pages, I was like on the edge of my seat. If you don't mind violence and gore and torture, this is a good book. It was just like, it was hard to read. It was a lot. And even thinking about it now, I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot that happened. That is like, but this is 186 pages. It's not that long. You could read it in a day, and it packs a punch in those pages. And I'm thinking about buying the next book to kind of see what happens after, but let me tell you something, man. This was quite the book. I was not expecting this. After that book, I needed something lighthearted, and I read House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. This book is like, everyone talks about how great it is, and it is. It's so good. I rated this a 4.5 or 5 out of 5. I wasn't sure what to rate this as because it's so good. It's so heartwarming. But basically, if you don't know what this is about, oh, please stop. This cat will like literally stop. Can you hear that? Oh, I have goosebumps. The wall paint is matte, and then she like scratches down it and it makes this noise, and it's like nails in her top. I don't know if you can hear that, but she needs to stop because I'm so uncomfortable. This book is basically about this caseworker. It's basically like CPS for magical youth, and he gets assigned this very special case. It's very secretive, and he goes there to make sure everything is good to go. And when he goes there, there's these 6 dangerous kids, and he starts to spend time with them and learn more about them. And one of the children, I don't know if this is a spoiler or not, but he's literally like the son of Lucifer. He's the Antichrist. So I was like, oh. But this book is so heartwarming, and literally at the end I was at the verge of tears. I didn't quite cry, but I wanted to. It's so funny and so relevant, and it talks a lot about like, the idea is like about empathy and preconceptions and government systems and the marginalization of people seen as like others, and how that's like quite obviously wrong. But it's truly so good and heartwarming, and it is fantasy, which I do not read fantasy, but it's so light of fantasy that I feel like anyone could get something out of this book. It's so good, and it's so light-hearted, and it's so good. Truly, I really like this book. I reread Aristotle and Dante, Discover the Secrets of the Universe, because the new book came out. What is it called? whatever the new one is. I wanted to read this because this was like, okay, so basically I read this book originally in like 2017, 2018, somewhere around there, because I was in a coming of age literature class in college, and this was one of my favorites that I ended up reading through this and The Namesake. But I loved it so much, and it's so heartwarming, and I loved it originally, and I was like, when the new one came out, I'm like, I have to read it, but I was like, I haven't read this in so long, I need to reread it. But this book's like so heartwarming. The ending specifically always gets me, but basically it's about Aristotle and Dante and their friendship as their coming of age, and I don't even want to spoil like what happens with their friendship, because like it's just truly so heartwarming, and I recommend anyone reading this book. It's so good. This next book is the one that I'm saying is like my new favorite. It's in like the top. So if you don't know how I do my rating system, like 5 stars for me is like, it's a good book. I don't have any qualms with it. I really enjoyed it. But that doesn't mean it's like my favorite book ever. I have a hell yeah star books for my favorites that are like my favorite of all time, which has like Looking for Alaska, Normal People, My Dark Vanessa, what else? Norwegian Wood, things like that. Books that are just like my all-time favorite. This is now on that list. Okay, so It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. I have so many thoughts on this, but basically, I originally read Verity a couple months back and was obsessed with it. It was the first Colleen Hoover book I ever read, and it was so good. However, it was a thriller book, which she is primarily a romance author, and I was like, no, I really liked her thriller book. I want more of that. Even though I do like romance, I don't know why I had this like off-putting feeling about her romances. There's like no reason. I just was like, no, her thriller was good. But I was like, you know what, I'm gonna give one a try, and I saw a lot of people talking about this one. So I went into this book thinking it was just this light-hearted romance book, and boy was I wrong. But I loved it. This, you definitely need to look up trigger warnings, because this deals with abuse and things that come out of that in general. And I think this portrayed abuse very accurately, if I'm being honest. But this book really took me by surprise. Like, it's just so honest, and it shows why things aren't always just as easy as like, just leave him. And like, let me tell you something. When I was reading the back of this makes it seem like it's just gonna be a love triangle book, which I did not feel it was like that at all. But as someone who's kind of gone through some of these things, I felt like I saw a lot of myself in this main character here, and I was able to relate to this a lot. And like, I feel like this book is so powerful, and like, don't get me wrong, there are definitely some like cheesy points throughout this book that I was kind of like, really? But like, it is so good. Like, it's so good. and let me tell you something. If you read this book, you need to read the author's note at the end. I never read author's notes, but after I finished this book, I was crying. Like, and I was like, I need to read this. And it is so beautiful. Like, this whole book is so beautiful and raw. And the author's note talks about how this is basically based around the real life events that her mother went through. And it made me respect Colleen Hoover and her writing like significantly more. And I really didn't think I was gonna like any of her work better than Verity, because I was like, Verity's so good, but like, this has become one of my top favorite books. I literally want to get a tattoo that has something to do with this book, because it is so truly beautiful. And I have so, let me tell you something. Whenever I got to the point where it like you realized what the title was about, I was crying. I was crying. It's so, I have so many words, but like, I don't want to spoil anything. If you can go into this book knowing like nothing, you should read it that way. other than just knowing what your limits are on triggers. But let me tell you something, there's so much in this book that I just adored. I want to reread it immediately and go through and pick up some more things and highlight some more things. But this is like a Hailey ass star. Like, this is one of my new favorites. And then the last book I read was Before the Coffee Gets Cold. Now this is basically about this little magical coffee shop where if you go there you can travel back in time, but there's a lot of rules with the traveling back in time. You have to sit in this one chair and you can only be in the past until your coffee you're drinking gets cold. And you can only, meet with people who have been to that coffee shop in the past. So not everyone is interested in, traveling back, because for some people there's no reason if, there's all these rules around it. But this basically follows 4 different storylines in their story into why they're wanting to travel back to the past. Such a cool concept. For me, the execution of the book didn't do it for me. I know a lot of people like this, and I love like Japanese translated work, but this book was dragging for me. It drug on. I did not enjoy it. I rated this a 2 out of 5. I'm sure some people like this. I didn't. I didn't. And it's a pretty short book. Like, if you want to read it, I would say go for it. If you like the idea of that, read it for sure, because it's like 200 pages. A little bit more. So you could, I read this in a day. It was kind of boring for me, if I'm being honest. But it was like my last book of the month because I read it literally the 31st. So I wanted a little short read so I could get it done in a day, and I did. It was just, I didn't enjoy it. But I had a lot of really good books this month. It Ends With Us just hit me so different, and I loved it so much. And there were some really good books, like The House in the Cerulean Sea, The Anthropocene Reviewed, Misery, Beautiful World, Where Are You? There's so many just really good books this month. So I feel like I had a good reading month. And I don't normally read this many books. I'm normally around like 6. But yeah, next I'm reading another Colleen Hoover. I ordered a bunch of them after I read It Ends With Us because I feel like I'm going to be a Colleen Hoover stan, because honestly her books are just so easy to read. Like, she writes so well that you're like not even like realizing you're reading. Like, it doesn't feel like you're reading. It doesn't feel like a chore. It's just like you're so like into the story that you want to know what's going to happen. Like I always thought like it was gonna be overrated because everyone talked about her, and like I don't know what I thought they were gonna be, but they're so good. At least It Ends With Us and Verity. Like, she may become one of my new favorite authors if I'm honest, but I can't stop talking about it. Like, it's like I can't stop thinking about it. It's been days since I read It Ends With Us and I can't stop thinking about it. It's so good. I don't think I can say its praises enough. But anyway, those are all the books I read this month. I will see you next time. Have a great day and like and subscribe. Bye bye.